Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander. We are at the Open Mind Conference in Skanderborg, Denmark, where Ulf Dahlström is giving two lectures, Who Are We? And the History of Free Energy. Ulf Dahlström, who's actually Swedish originally, but who's been living in America for 30 years and has been studying with Stanley Meyer as a scientist. And Ulf Dahlström, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to Denmark. Have you been here before?
Yeah, I've been here several times before.
Have you lectured here before?
Not in Denmark, no.
Not in Denmark. So it's the first time at the Open Mind Conference here.
First time.
Why are you now coming out with all this fascinating information that we're going to discuss today?
I think it's just one of those things that happened. Something triggered him and says, okay, it's time to go out and talk about it. A lot of other people are already talking about it, so my information is not really new. A lot of other people are already talking about it. But so I just want to add my flavor to the mix.
Why did you move to America and been living there for 30 years?
Basically got a prompting from inside, if you will, a gut feeling to go. And that's what I did already early when I was 18.
Where have you lived in America?
All over the place.
Really?
Yeah. Chicago, California, Ohio when I was there with Stan. East Coast, West Coast, Florida, Hawaii.
Wow, you've been
West
around
Coast.
there.
Yeah.
So you are basically American now.
I'm American now.
So Stanley Meyer, that's quite a legendary figure, and you've been working quite a lot with him, obviously. It would be interesting as an introduction, if you could just introduce yourself, say exactly what it is that you've been doing also with Stanley Meyer. And we were all listening to your lecture yesterday at the Open Mind Conference, and it would be interesting to just headline a couple of these things. Because we go into the field of belief system, extrasensory perception, quantum theory, time travel, time, space, and our DNA. So there's a lot to cover.
Right.
So if you just want to talk a little bit about what it actually was that you were doing with Stanley Meyer.
Well, when I met him, I was also interested in other things. I was with Keely, studied Keely also, World Keely, that was before Tesla. And it just happened I connected with Stanley and he asked me to work, if I wanted to work with him there, which is basically what I did. I helped him with electronic circuits, I helped him with physical, mechanical things, I helped him with doing things on the computer, to help him with data collection and doing things for his accounting, basically.
What year did you meet him?
Not good with years, but it was in the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s is when I was there.
All right, please tell us just briefly who Stanley Meyer was, what was his primary thing, and what, he had a tragic death actually also. Just if we can just briefly talk about him in order to understand where you are coming from as well.
I think he was inspired very much from he was looking at the Christian thing from maybe a different perspective. On his car it says Jesus Christ is Lord. And so he had a strong connection with that. And that's kind of, he got the inspiration from that to go forward and do something with water. He was referring to Job in the Bible also about the water.
Was he very religious?
He was. I don't think he was religion in the normal sense of going to church and believing in the doctrines but there was components of that he had a very strong conviction from. So based on that, that's where he went forward, and he used to work with truck parts and making parts for trucks before, and then he went into this business of trying to do something with water. And when I met him, that was his whole thing, just getting a car to run on water. He had other inventions. He had an EPG system, which is a magnetic gas that he's created that was able to generate electricity. He worked on some other projects too, getting power from the ionosphere. So he had some other things, but his whole focus when I met him was just on the water and getting the water core working.
And we're going to go into the field of what water is, what water can do. So what happened with Stanley eventually, when he died way too soon. Was it in 1998?
98, yeah.
Yeah. What happened with his death? There's a lot of conspiracy theories about how he actually died and why that supposedly happened.
Well, I wasn't there at the time this happened. That was after I left him already, so I cannot say exactly what happened from my own experience. I also heard afterwards, what expired. But I do know that he had several attempts on his life before that.
Why?
He was offered different amounts of money to sell out his technology, and he refused to do it. And he just didn't want to do that. He wanted to bring out the technology for the small businessmen to bring it into America. That was the way he wanted to do things. And so he didn't do that.
So you think somebody could have killed him because he didn't want to sell out? He wanted to sell his technology?
I don't know, because then anybody could have killed him earlier if they wanted to, if that was really the plan. He kept on doing his research, but it seems to me that when you came to a phase where you do commercialization, that's where maybe it becomes more of a threat to the industry.
Was there anything in his studies, in his technology, in his development, and what he talked about that could jeopardize the financial system or anything that would kind of change things if people knew about this technology, about water, and the possibilities of using water as technology?
Of course, if he would have gone out and showed it publicly the exact thing how to do it. He has his patents and there is other documentation out there. And there's people today that's trying to copy and reproduce his work. And maybe there are some people out there that's very close to it, maybe even somebody has done it. But as far as bringing it into commercialization, that has not happened yet. And that would be the point where it becomes a threat for somebody that has huge stakes at hand. But before that, there's really no threat. It's like you and me, we can sit there and create some incredible stuff and it doesn't going to affect anybody else.
So what exactly can water do? What is it about water except, we can drink it and we can swim in it, but there's so much more to water than just what meets the eye, obviously, and that was what you were talking about yesterday.
Yeah.
It would be interesting if you can just mention a little bit about what water can do. What can water be used for?
Well, if you bring water down and start splitting it up, you have hydrogen, you have oxygen, there's also nitrogen, there's differences.
Nitrogen?
There's trace elements of different components in the water too that we have in space, we have it within us. But mainly it's oxygen and hydrogen. And so hydrogen and water basically, we are 70% or so water. The body of the planet is mostly water. And if you look in space, there's hydrogen is everywhere. And so it's one of the main components that we have in the universe. Now, the thing of releasing the hydrogen out of the water is nothing new. I mean, Mercedes, BMW, and also NASA, they've used hydrogen as propulsion systems. The problem has always been to convert the water into hydrogen and then taking the hydrogen, storing it, and then again using it for propulsion. It's a very expensive process. It's not cost effective. So that's why we don't see it in normal transportation. I mean, you can put it in a car and it has been done. So
you can put water into a car.
No, basically what you're doing, you're taking water and then you're using an electrolytic process of some sort to release the hydrogen component, separate out the hydrogen. Then you can take the hydrogen and stick it into a PEM, which is a proton exchange membrane of a regular fuel cell, and then you can get electricity. That electricity can then be used to run in a car, for instance. And that's been done. But it's a very expensive process. It's not cost efficient. There's no infrastructure for it. It's very explosive under high pressure. So that's not really commercial.
But would it be so expensive?
It would still be expensive if using the current technology, yes. And it also would be very explosive to do it. So what Stan was trying to do is to release that water, the hydrogen out of the water, in an inexpensive way that doesn't cost much energy to do it, and do it in a way that's safe in order to drive a car. In other words, you don't have to have a tank with a lot of explosive things in it. Okay, we're driving cars right now also with diesel or benzene. It's also explosive, but not to the sense of compressed hydrogen.
So gas and gasoline wouldn't be
expensive.
necessary anymore.
No, it wouldn't be necessary. Because
so it would jeopardize the whole financial system in the way that we use oil or gas or different elements.
Everything, because the energy production is the biggest industry on the planet. It's bigger than anything else. And so it's not just oil, but it's energy production in general. So yeah, if you cannot control that, or those people that have those interests at hand, they might not be interested in see a replacement of that, unless they can control it. Or there's a different way of bringing it into an economy without having a big disturbance for them.
So why don't they do that?
That's a very good question. I mean, there's oil and you can take, you know, you're bringing it out of the ground, it's very expensive, polluting, whatever. But if you do water, well, anybody can get water. Water out of the tap, water from a lake, you can also desalinate water simply, then there's no need to go and buy it.
Right. But why don't you think that that information is given to the world and implanted into the world?
Because it seems that this has been suppressed, and not just Stan's technology, but stuff since Tesla. Tesla was also suppressed. A lot of his technologies, if we had them today, we'd been driving cars without fossil fuels also, or what called fossil fuels.
Talk about Nikola Tesla, who was this great scientist who died all the way back in 1943, actually. And supposedly he created or invented free energy and even means to teleportation, time travel, and other things. Please talk about these things that Tesla supposedly invented.
Well, you know, I wasn't alive at the time, so I have no way of knowing other than backhand information. But from other people that have studied Tesla, it seems that he had, I mean, the Wardcliffe Tower is a big example. That's been sort of reproduced, I believe, also from his Colorado Springs experiments, where he could actually transfer power wirelessly to hit the light bulb, is what they did in those experiments. And then later on, he was building this tower, supposedly for communications, but then also it could be used for transmitting energy wirelessly, like over to Europe. And of course, if you cannot get any money out of that, like you do with today's electricity, then it's not a viable economic interest. And that was shut down. See, he didn't get the funding to finish it. And
What kind of energy was that in the natural?
He calls it radiant energy, or as far as I can remember, it's the energy in space. You know, he says the whole space is saturated with an energy, potential energy, and this is the energy.
So we all have it right here in the air, or what?
Yeah, everywhere.
It's in the air, or
it's everywhere.
The ground.
Yeah. It's everywhere. It's like you have energy in the water, but it sits there. It's just in the glass, not really doing anything, unless you do a conversion of it. And the way I'm looking at that as a metaphor is a car battery. If you have a car battery and you have electrons in it, and then if there's an unbalance in the battery, then the electrons always wants to balance, just like in our body. The pH wants to balance, it goes to homeostasis, they say. So you put a load on this thing, then the electrons flow in through a circuit, hits a light bulb and it lights up. And then it goes back until it's flat. And when it's flat, it's dead, and the light bulb doesn't, you know, it doesn't light up anymore. If you look at the universe and space around here as the same as a lot of energy sitting at balance, then nothing is happening. However, if you excite the field to create an imbalance in that field, like in the car battery, then you can start tapping that energy. And I think this is what Tesla did, and this is what a lot of other inventors have done in different ways. And then there's a lot of non-polluting energy out there that can be used.
He also talked about time travel and teleportation. You also mentioned that and talked a bit about that yesterday in your lecture. And I don't know how much you've researched this, but probably a lot. And you also mentioned Al Bielek and Andrew D. Bashago, who was been quite famous for talking about his time travel experiments that he was exposed to as a child. And Al Bielek did the same with the Philadelphia experiment. And it would be interesting now that you are one of the people who are actually talking about these two, and it's connecting to Tesla, to talk about if time travel and teleportation is possible according to you, and what is time and what is space.
Yeah, this is a thing that's it's very hard to wrap your head around. Based on what they are saying, and I know Al Bielek for quite a long time.
Did you know him?
Yeah, I know him for quite a long time, and you know he.
And did you sense that it was true? It was real what he was saying?
Yeah. I mean,
do you know for a fact? Do you feel that it's a true story what he says? I
feel it is a true story from knowing him for many years. But you can be deceived, so I cannot guarantee one or the other. But as a person, and other people I met as well as Phil Schneider and other people, you know, they seem like solid people.
Phil Schneider as well. You knew him?
Yeah.
And he was killed in what, 93? It's a long time
supposedly
ago.
committed suicide, yeah.
Supposedly committed suicide, yeah, what they say, yeah.
Yeah.
But he spoke about a lot of attempts on his life before actually
Yeah.
getting killed or committing suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, so going back, according also, if you start looking at the Philadelphia experiment and that story, then supposedly Tesla and Dr. Jessup was involved in that. And they was trying to come up with a way of making a ship radar invisible. That was the cover story, the story that was told, and for the sailors that was on board a ship. But in reality, they wanted to do something more. And initially, it's my understanding that Tesla was part of that project, but withdraw. And then
Why did he?
maybe he figured out what they were up to, or maybe he didn't want to be part of it. I think what happened is that they were pushing the project within a specific timeline to have it done. And they didn't have enough time to finish the experiment or do it correctly. And I think this is part of what happened, that something went wrong. And when this went wrong, then the ship ended up in what they refer to as hyperspace. It disappeared. And there was apparently a lot of people that saw this happen. And then it reappeared again.
But they also talked about invisibility.
Yeah.
Was that what happened?
Well, I mean, the thing is, from Al's perspective, being on board the ship together with his Duncan camera, what he experienced was that he ended up in 1983 from 1943. And then basically there's a movie made, actually came out in 1983. And according to Al, most of the stuff in there is pretty accurate, except the Hollywood version with the woman and some other things. But that's basically the scenario where I think it was John von Neumann that was also part of it, that in the time period had figured out some things of what went wrong, and then had him come back and try to fix it, and basically shut down the equipment. So
what was the name of the ship?
SS Eldridge.
Eldridge, that's true, yeah. But that also happened in 1943.
43.
The same year that Tesla died.
Yeah, I think it was 43, yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting connection if he was part of it and withdrew.
Yeah, withdraw, or had some influence on the project at least. That's my understanding from what I know.
But Al Bielek also talked about visiting the future at 2 points. One in was it? I can't remember the exact year. It was 2137 and then 27 something, or whenever it was. It was quite in the distant future.
Right.
And you knew Al Bielek, which is interesting. So can you say, did he ever talk to you about these experiences?
Yeah, sure.
And what did he say? What did you think of all of that?
Well, I mean, based on other people that I met, and corroborating stories, I mean, unless everybody's lying to you, and usually, if you know somebody for a while, you get to know the person a bit, and who knows? But it seems to me that it had some validity to it. And he was explaining some of these experiences and different things that took place, and his viewpoint on what happened. He was part of the Montauk also a group.
Montauk project, yeah.
Yeah, and so on, and so he explained and talked about that, some of the things, and yeah.
But could his experiences be mind control experiments, really, MK Ultra?
Anything is possible.
False memory syndrome.
Especially since he was, he also told me, that in the beginning he didn't have the full memory of what happened, and that came back to him, and then he has started this journey of corroborating his memory with reality. And then finding clues, and then finding people that know him, etc., and gradually more and more his memory come back. So it could very well be that something like that took place as well. But obviously there was other people involved there too, and they could all be part of the same problem. Like, what's his name?
George Wardlow.
Yeah, exactly, one of them.
Andrew D. Basiago was not supposedly under mind control, as far as at least not what he's talking about.
Right.
He said he had these experiences as a child, visiting when Lincoln was shot, and going to different timelines, and even being on Mars with Barack Obama, which is also quite interesting. Did you know anything about his story? Have you met him? I
haven't met him. I missed him. I was going to meet him when I was in the States last time, but I haven't met him. But I listened to his story, and it's fascinating also. Now again, there's the thing of how these machines, because these were actually machines that were created, and he explains them.
Like Stargates.
It's like a Stargate type of thing. And another device where is more like a TV, where you can sort of tune in and see things from past, future events without actually going there physically. Tesla was supposedly also involved in most of these things as far as the technology. And I heard that also some of the technology from Fermi, which was the other scientist in Italy, and according to a story I heard, there was something that happened by mistake that triggered an event where a person in a lab situation just disappeared. And they got really scared and they shut down the project, whatever. And then a couple of 2-3 weeks later, the guy came back. And he had been basically teleported to another part in Africa where he had to go find his way back. And then they said, okay, wow, that's amazing. So then they tried to figure out what triggered that and so on. And then research and further research. And then they came up with these things. This is the story I've heard, so I cannot verify. But yeah.
So you have not been part of that kind of project or been into that?
No.
And neither did Stanley Meyer. He was not involved in anything?
Not that I know of, no.
So what do you, when you in your lectures talk about time travel and time and space, you say that there is no time, no space?
Well, what I'm saying is basically, I'm not trying to explain what it is or what it is not. What I'm trying to do is to raise an awareness of that maybe time is not just linear the way we see it, that there is like this beginning and this end here. And that's how we always see time, okay, historically, and the future is there and the past is there. But if you try to wrap your hand around the fact or the idea that the universe or life in general never had a starting point, which means it's infinite. Now, we have a hard time wrapping our heads around something that never ever started. It's just always been. Just that thought alone, it's just really hard to wrap your head around.
Never started and never
maybe
stops.
Never ends also, yeah, exactly. And so you have this continuum, and you know, how can that be? How can something just come into creation? Because you're still thinking about something coming into creation, but something's always been. It's really hard to wrap your head around that. And so the same thing a little bit with time, you know, we are hard time thinking that, okay, going back in time, how can that be possible going in the future?
How could it be possible?
Well, it depends. If you look at this 3D reality and say, okay, this is where we are now, it could be a possibility that there's parallel realities, which is going on in parallel, and we're tapping into some of those things. But the now experience is the only thing that we can reference to, and that's how we are at the moment. However, there is the situation where, talking from my own experience, and I think a lot of other people, is where you get a very clear image, a very clear situation shown to you. And then a year later, 2 years later, that exact thing happens. This is a future event that came to you. Some
people have those experiences?
Yeah, sure. And then a lot of people have what they call déjà vu experiences too. That's also kind of hard to explain. But when it comes to when you have repeated experiments or experiences like this, then you have to ask yourself the question, how could that be possible?
Some people have said that they have seen something and then 2 years later or a long time after, then it
exactly
materializes.
Happens. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that they kind of have an indication on that. But in science, they have this thing where you have, it's what I explained a little bit in the lecture, where this non-locality phenomenon, where one part of a quantum part of something changes, then instantly the other part that's attached to it changing also, independent of space. So that means that it could be superluminal. And then if you go superluminal, which means faster than light, then you get what's called negative time. And this is the stuff they're talking about in quantum physics, which means if you go the opposite direction, you will get future time. And that doesn't account in the theories of Einstein. There is the limitation of the speed of light. But this goes beyond that, and that's kind of something that violates that kind of idea. But if you look at those things, if there's a quantum hologram, as they say, where all these things are happening, then there's a possibility that from the now moment you can go into the past and the future, and that could be an explanation. I don't have the answers, but I'm trying to give some ideas to people that maybe think about maybe it's not just linear, more of a round thing, if anything.
What indicates that that could be our reality?
Well, the indication would be if it's true that what Al is talking about, he did go back in time, or he did forward in time as well. One of the stories he told me is that he picked up a Time magazine from the future, took it with him back, And then, of course, he said he gave it away, so there was no way for me to verify anything. But still, and then it wouldn't matter now anyway, because we passed 83 as it is. But if this occurred, well, then there's reference point that this is possible. And there's more and more people coming forward saying that they have actually done this, not just Basiago and Al Bielek. Al Bielek is passed on now, but there's other people claiming the same thing.
Mm-hmm. You also talk about that we're living in a holographic reality. Please explain how we are in a holographic reality. We're sitting right here. I'm sitting in front of you.
Yeah.
And we can touch this glass of water,
yeah,
and how can this be a holographic?
Well, the holographic reality basically is the idea that every part is linked to each other. In other words, like one drop of the water is linked to all the other drops, and that we've shown in experiments that seems to be the case. And also in a holographic picture, if you take one piece of the picture out, you have the image of the full picture is in every part of it. And they've done experiments with that, with the aura from trees and plants and so on, where you can see those effects. So there's things
the aura from the trees, like human beings.
Yeah.
Some people can see a human
No, I was
being's
just
aura.
saying, I mean, they're called the Kirlian photographer, and there's a new type of photography now out there that looking at the fields, the energetic fields, and you can see that the field is there even though a limb is gone or a part of the leaf is gone, indicating that the information of the full thing is still there. It's still there.
So how can we manifest physically? We can touch ourselves, we can feel ourselves, through our five senses and this three-dimensional world that we're in. I mean, how can this be a hologram?
Well, it still can be a hologram. It's just a label. It's just a name of showing the interconnectedness with everything. And also in the Mandelbrot set, which is a mathematic formula that shows that, as you drill down, you get this recursive event. As you drill down deep enough, you come back to the same thing again. It's repeating itself, both up and down. And which, in that model, you can also see that if one piece of this mathematical puzzle is changed, then it affects all the other ones. Just like the ripple effect in water, and you just throw a stone in it, it ripples out, and then the ripples goes back. So which means that we are all, basically, if you look at it energetically, then we are all a vibration. And that vibration, this is what I talked about yesterday, even though we feel solid and the table is solid, what it is that makes it solid, maybe it's a slower vibration versus a faster vibration. And so yes, it's solid in that sense. But in reality, when you bring it down, it's just a frequency, it's a vibration. And that's the vibration that our brain's picking up and converting a signal. It's the decoding of these vibrations. That's how we perceive reality. And it's not maybe as solid as we think it is. We even say if you bring it down to the molecular level, the electron in respect to the proton is like the space from Earth to the moon or Earth to the sun. So it's mostly 99% empty space.
So when talking about parallel universes and possibly time travel and this being a holographic reality, how does all of that fit together? Where's the source, if any?
Of what?
Of all of this projection, this holographic reality, there's all of these timelines that we talk about, all of this, all these parallel universes.
Well,
how many parallel universes are there?
Well, the thing is, none of this is proven, so it's basically theoretical. But the idea being that we are on different timelines and they are parallel to each other, which would mean that it could be an infinite. Again, we're talking about this concept of infinity. And then you would have an infinity amount of yourself sitting on the left side and on the right side of you. So what you're experiencing
So do we
now,
look the same and have the same kind of existence and experience?
Except there's different choices. So in this reality that you may see altogether, it's just because this is the most heavy one right now. So you don't perceive the other ones because they're not so strong. From your perspective here now, versus that would be the same thing from that part of you that's in the next timeline over. This one would not be perceived because that's the stronger one. Which means that you have a choice, so you made a choice to have an interview with me here, so you're sitting here.
Yeah.
And this other
So are we sitting doing this interview in another timeline, another parallel universe?
Or in the next parallel universe, maybe it didn't happen. That's another choice. And then because of that choice, there's other events happening because of those choices. So which means that you have the ability to do and explore all infinite possibilities of choices and all the different outcomes of those choices at the same time, at the same moment.
So are we the same in different parallel universes? Are we the same? Are you Ulf? Am I Lucas in a different timeline? The same, this materialization?
We might be the same, or we might be a little different, but we have different aspects of ourselves. For instance, you might be doing an interview in this one, and another one you might be a mechanic, or you might be a pilot, or you might be an artist, or you might be doing something completely different than this reality. Which is what this guy is talking about, quantum jumping, meaning that if we play with the idea that this might be a possibility, and you want to kind of prove to yourself in this reality, is there some benefit by that? And that's what he was doing. He would plug into this other part of himself that might be a master chef in the kitchen or whatever. In his case,
plug into how and in what way? Is like the Matrix movies where they're kind of plugged into a kind of device and then they manifest it through thinking or the
no, I think it's more of a vibrational thing. It's like you have your own vibration, and so that's because it's just like your DNA. It's very specific. We have a specific energetic thing, and so in all these other ones we are linked somehow. And the idea then that he's coming up
linked to the same source.
So the same source of you. There's
the same source of you, which is.
If we look just at the parallel timelines now, because you can go in and looking at what source of everything is, and that part of you being part of that's a different discussion. But just looking at the timelines, what he's doing would be like tapping into, in his case, he did painting, because right here now, there's something he's really not good at. He could do these easy little things like this. He couldn't draw. So he was trying to plug into this part of himself that really knows the stuff and bring it into this reality. And now his paintings are selling for $20,000. And so he created that. And you can say, well, maybe he could just have that in here for them. But he did 3 or 4 different things to prove for himself that this is a possibility. And then he came up with a technique that people can do themselves to try it out. And then he calls that quantum jumping. And so...
is that possible as well?
Well,
quantum jumping?
According to him it is, and that's what he's proving. And if somebody wants to try it out, he's got the technique to do it. And maybe you can just do it, figure it out yourself too.
So quantum jumping, is that like jumping from one parallel universe to another?
It's more like tuning into the vibration of another parallel thing and then bringing that information that you want into this one. And I think it's a communication, like the water can communicate with other droplets in the water, but you can communicate with this other part of your DNA and this other maybe parallel reality. And through that communication, you can pull out that information that you need in this one.
So you won't go and manifest in a different timeline or in a different parallel universe?
No.
And you cannot jump from one parallel universe to another?
Maybe that's possible too, but that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about pulling the information or the skills or whatever from this other parallel reality.
You also talk about, the DNA, of course, but you also about the water, that you can talk to water and it reacts. How is that possible?
Well, that's an open question how it's possible, but it seems to me that it's vibration. Everything is a vibration. Your thought is a vibration, your emotion is a vibration.
Like the law of attraction?
Well, I don't know, law of attraction, but that's also a vibration. But everything is a vibration. So your intent is a vibration. Everything is a vibration. So it interacts with other things, since that also is a vibration. If you bring it all down to the quantum level, it's all a vibration. And then it interacts at that level. And then it's very possible to communicate, or information comes both ways. So yeah, you can interact with things. If you have a crystal glass and an opera singer sings at a specific frequency, it breaks because of that. And also, when you're doing harmonic resonance, like when you do different things, you can get other things to break. That's what also Tesla did. And in music, you have scales of music, and those tones create specific frequencies that we interpret as sound. But again, what is sound? It's just a vibration that's interpreted by the brain, by a chemical neurological reaction.
So everything is something that's interpreted by the brain?
It is. The brain in its physiological body is interpreting it. But who is it that's having the experience?
What did somebody like, say, Helen Keller, what did she experience? She was, blind and deaf and dumb?
Yeah. Exactly. What did she experience?
Oftentimes I find on the internet quotes from Helen Keller, which of course is quite extraordinary, and she seemed to be quite quite perceptive, actually. It's like some people claim that she was like channeling a different type of energy because that was all she could perceive. Do you know?
Well, I
about
think,
that?
I don't know specifically in her case, but it seems that when people get deaf or don't see anymore, on physical sight that is, that these other faculties gets more advanced. So a blind person can perceive and hear vibration and be more sensitive to that. But if you take it all away, like in her case, it could be similar to I can't remember this name of this guy, but somebody, you can develop different things within your body, like the pineal gland, the pituitary glands, and so on, where we can have sight and all these faculties without the physical hearing and so on.
So that could be possible to actually see without seeing and hear without really hearing in how we understand it in our physical reality.
And you can look it up. I think it's in the internet somewhere also. But there's a guy that did a test, and the money for this experiment went actually to the blind, as far as I remember. But the guy was blindfolded, and then he was put like a black thing you put on your head, you know, so that there is no light coming in. And then there was a person sitting in the car next to him. And then they had police in front and back because they were doing this in, I think it was in, it was in Rio or one of the big cities down there, Sao Paulo maybe. And in the middle of traffic, he was driving through the city from one point to the other, through a lot of different things and streetlights and whatever, blindfolded with this thing on him. Because he was not using his sight, he was using this inner sight that he had developed. And I think we all can develop. And I think that could have been the case with her, that she learned to develop that more than others.
You use the third eye, the pineal gland.
You can call it the third eye, but also if you ever have had it, or if you talk to people that has a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience, they're very conscious. They can see and they can hear and they can perceive everything.
Please tell us what a near-death experience is.
Well, this is people that end up dead for whatever reason. And I have several friends that have gone through this, where in a car accident, for instance, and then boom, all of a sudden they find themselves outside of their body. In the case of my friend, he was looking down and saw the car and saw this little body in the car, and that was actually him. Didn't realize it, didn't even realize what happened first. And then he experienced this reality that is where you can go through walls, you can do different things. The thoughts just
like a ghost?
Well, whatever you want to put in the label of ghost, you know, for him it was very real.
Spirits.
And then you know, he came back into the body again. And some people have this happen several times. Well, from that perception, then you realize that maybe, you know, this bodily, biological suit that we are wearing, maybe that's not really necessary for all those faculties.
But didn't he recognize himself?
Yeah, sure, he recognized himself.
So what does that mean if you actually die and you can see yourself? A lot of Christians and, I don't know, religious people around the world have been talking about what's going to happen when we die, going to heaven or
well, that all
wherever.
depends on your belief system, right? So from those people that I know, you know, their experiences, they're all different, but very similar in terms of what they experience in that other realm. And we're all different there too, and maybe there's different levels of frequencies even in those areas. You know, who knows? But it's
so then it's all about belief or perception?
I mean, if you die or your faculties, in other words, if you're clinically dead, your heart is stopped, your brain is stopped, everything is stopped, and you're fully conscious and aware of what's going on, and then come back and reactivate all of that, well, then you were, I mean, technically you were dead, but on a conscious level where you were not dead, you were completely conscious.
So what do you think happens when we die?
Yeah, it's an open question. I mean, it seems like there is no death. It's basically just a transition to a thing of more of a spirit nature or a different frequency level, I would say. And that seems to be what you can say. I mean, based on all the experiments for people that had near-death experiences, people that do those things, that seems to be the consensus.
So where do we go when we die if there's no death? And what is it? What is no death?
Well, no death is an experience of being alive, being conscious, being aware.
And you can still, but there's no physical reality.
No, it's a different reality. That's all. Different frequency, different reality. In the case of
So is it consciousness?
yeah, again, what is consciousness?
In your view, what is consciousness?
Well, consciousness for me is that you are aware, an awareness, and that awareness can be at different levels. And in this reality, it also has to do with where your belief systems are. I mean, if people believe you go to heaven, then whatever heaven means for them, maybe that's what they perceive is happening, and then they die. Maybe they create that. Just the way that we create something when we send an energy into the glass here, it creates a form.
So how can we create that? By the power of our thought?
Could be our thought, or it could be something more higher than just the thoughts. I mean, we have our heart space that is also very powerful. The Heart Math Institute is trying to measure that, and they say that the energetic field from the heart is much, much stronger than the brain or the mind, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows?
So there is some kind of force that we can use, like what we've heard in what we've seen in Star Wars.
I think it's all energy, and then it's you can take a knife and you can cut bread with it, or you can do other things with it, and that's up to you. What do you want to do with that energy? So you can use it in different ways.
Have you heard of something called mitochondria?
Mitochondria, yeah.
And can you explain to us what that is exactly? Mitochondria.
Well, I'm not a biologist or anything, but mitochondria, in my understanding, is one of the basic elements that triggers the energy on the cellular level to keep the body going. And there's people postulate where is that energy coming from, and that's another open question.
Like DNA?
No, I don't think mitochondria is DNA. I think it's a trigger mechanism in the body that creates energy and pumps it in, or keeps ourselves alive. And then there's what they call, I guess, ATP, and there are different things in the body. And again, I'm not a biologist, so I shouldn't even go there. But the interesting thing is also Wilhelm Reich is looking at, where's the energy, where's the body getting the energy to keep on going?
Yeah.
Right. And so there's a guy in Austria that made a documentary, went out and checked out with these people that are living just on light. They're not eating, and then some of them they're not drinking either. And there is no problem with that seemingly for these people. And how could that be? Where are they getting the energy from? Because they're not like skeletons. They're living a normal life. And
they're not starving?
Not starving, no.
Or dying almost?
No.
And they don't drink water? Or
Some of them also don't drink water.
But and you know how important water is. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So.
But of course, there's
and you
water.
say that the body has how much air?
70% or so, whatever water.
Yeah.
But then again, there's water in the air. There's humidity, and so that we can take in that way. So we get it also when you're breathing. So if you get a technique to do that, and that's why some of these guys in India are called breatharians. Mm-hmm. That's what they teach, different ways of doing that. But I think it's not just a physical thing. I think it's also more of a spiritual trip that you go on when you try to do that, because it's a change in your belief system. If you don't believe you cannot do it, I think you'll have a hard time if you just stop eating now and see how it goes. I think you have to be personal.
So is it all about believing that you can do something and don't have any? And if you don't have a fear of doing it, or if you fear something, then you will also attract it. Then it sounds a lot like what The Secret and other people have, the spiritual leaders have talked about, the law of attraction.
I don't think it's quite that simple. I mean, there's one person, I can't remember her name, and she's going around also talking and teaching this, but she says the same thing. I mean, unless you have a strong conviction and that this is really what you want to do. In other words, what they're trying to say is that you have to plug into something more than this physical body in order to get the energy. And if you don't believe in that, or you cannot do that, then it's going to be very hard to do it. So it's not like everybody can just go out and do it. That's what she's saying, if I understand it correctly.
So how can we measure energy or intent or the mitochondria we just talked about? How can we measure that kind of energy in order to even say that something like that exists in our body?
Well, mitochondria I think is pretty well known in biology, what it is and how it works and whatever. That's something
So that can be measured?
I think that can be measured, yeah. Mm-hmm. But where the actual energy is coming from, that's like saying, okay, in atoms, where is the electron getting the energy to keep on spinning around the proton according to physics? Well, and then they have theories about it, but they keep on spinning. Where is the energy coming from? What's sustaining it?
Where do you think the energy is coming from?
Well, the energy, I think, is again, it's a vibrational energy that exists everywhere. Just like this balance that's out there, it's a frequency that keeps on going. And if you can plug into it, then It's there all the time. Just like here on this planet we have the sun, and where's the sun getting the energy from? Well, it keeps on going, but for a specific time, and then it goes into a death, and then it gets reborn as a star or a new star, and you have a process that keeps on going. So energy, I think, it's everywhere. It's just different levels of energy.
So it's the same kind of energy that goes through all of the parallel universes that you talk about, and also the different timelines that maybe exist?
They might or might not exist. I mean, it's a theory, and it's an interesting thing to look at reality in a different way. And as to say it's exactly the same energy, unless you really know, it's hard to also depict. But it seems Tesla figured out some of these energies that you could use to transport energy and communications on. And we have come up with things to do it with too. I mean, we have satellites today, and we have things where we're using energy. I mean, just to have a frequency going through the air and then looking in a TV somewhere else without any wires attached. Well, that's pretty amazing. But
or
it's
mobile phones with no cords.
Exactly. But there's a sender there, but still, it's an energy that goes through the air that we don't see, and it's got a frequency to it. And that's how we can communicate also. I mean, because we're decoding and encoding signals and frequencies. Pretty much everything the same way there.
So if there's no time and space, and if we can travel back and forth in time, then everything has already happened.
Everything is happening at the same time, I would say.
So every time we are always sitting right here doing this interview,
No.
and we're always getting born, we're always dying, we're always doing all the different things in
All
between.
the different things you are doing is maybe happening simultaneously. That's a theory anyway. Your experience would be that things are getting fuzzy as far as where you are, and also the time. And the deeper you go into it, you get to a point, and this anybody can experience, you get to a point where the time element and the space element stops to exist. And that's where you have a situation where you're sort of in a non-time space zone, which is the only moment which is now. And those people that experience those kind of moments, whether they do it outside of the body or whatever, they don't have any perception of time and space there in the way we have here.
And they see it as there is only the now.
Yeah, there's only the now.
So what about the past? Or
Well, the past is happening
or in
also.
2 minutes?
It's also happening in the now, in that sense. Again, I mean, this is theorizing of things, but you can look at stuff as predetermination. Like I said before, there's a couple of experiments where the brain is picking up a signal before we actually are aware of the action. Well, that's a future event then, that's already known. And the similar things when you have a clear picture of something that's going to happen and then it happens later. Then how do you explain that? And other things like that. So that's kind of the interesting idea. Is what I'm trying to do with these talks is basically get people to think outside the box, looking at reality maybe in a little different way, and then play with that. And then also have some tools on how to do it. And those tools are some of the things I mentioned in there. There is people doing these things like quantum jumping or holotropic breathing or whatever tool that fits you.
What is holotropic breathing?
It's a technique that Grove has come up with, which basically...
Who?
What's his first name? It's Grove is his last name. I can't remember his first name right now.
All right.
But anyway, holotropic breathing, you can look it up. It's available to look at. And it's a situation where you're using music, but it's not normal music. It's a frequency thing that is maybe more disharmonic, but it's a specific type of frequency together with a specific breathing technique. And once you get into a specific phase lock with that, it seems that it takes you into a different type of awareness. And
so what does that mean? That you play a piece of music and breathing?
There's two people. One person is lying down doing this specific breathing technique, and there's another person that are helping out, and then maybe they change around. And at the same time, this music is playing, or maybe it's not the technical right term music, but it's a vibration. It's sort of like a music that triggers together with the breathing the state of consciousness. And some people might even pop out of their body, have that kind of an experience in those things. But a lot of times it helps them with traumas or whatever.
Is that a kind of meditation?
No, it's not meditation. It's definitely more of a breathing, as far as I understand. I haven't done it myself, but I have friends.
So it's a special kind of way to breathe.
Yeah, so it's a very kind of special way to breathe. I mean, if you could do like very rapid breathing, you can saturate yourself and pass out. You can do that. So you can do a lot of things with breathing.
You also talk about extrasensory perception. What exactly is that?
Well, extrasensory perception is the perception of something that's outside of this physical world in a way, and that's been a lot of research and a lot of people. Extrasensory perception could be telekinesis or telepathy or all kinds of clairvoyance, whatever, different things where people have a gift maybe where they can pick up a knife and then they can tell the whole story of that knife. Or they can move an object just with their thought or whatever. So these are extrasensory.
So can we do that?
It seems that some people can do it, so which would indicate that probably most of us could do it. Doesn't mean that we can do it. In other words, something is latent there. It's like, can you become a good golf player? Yeah, you got the potential. Everybody got the potential, but not everybody can be as good at it as some people. But I think we have some of these things built into us, these perceptions.
Have you ever had that experience of trying to of bending something with your mind, like Uri Geller?
I haven't, but I know people that go around and teach people how to do it, and they have a group of maybe 10 or 15 people.
Have you seen it happen?
I've seen it happen from friends of mine, but I haven't done it. But it seems that that's possible. I mean, again, it's you're looking at something where you're putting your attention on something, and if that's a vibration and you act on something, you can see it. That's why I like water, because you can see a lot of things in the water. But why not? It could probably, I mean, if you have a crystal glass again and you sing that note, it break it. Well, that's a vibration also. So why not be able to bend something? What is the material in a spoon? It's also a frequency, it's a vibration. But I think we also can limit ourselves because of our belief system. If we believe it's not possible, then we make it not possible. I think we have to open ourselves up to the possibility if you only want to do something. If you don't think you can become a mechanic, then it's not going to be as easy for you to learn to become a mechanic because you're working against yourself.
So it's all about what you believe and how you perceive things.
I think it's a lot about how you perceive things, not so much what you believe, but how you perceive things. Our perceptions.
Is it possible that we can expand or develop some psychic abilities more so than we actually think we have available?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, there's different things you can do to actually do that. So there's different types of training protocols and courses and different things you can do to change that.
All human beings have parapsychological abilities?
I believe so. I think we all do.
And in what way can people expand their mind and open their mind, like what this conference is called? How can they actually do that if they don't really believe it or if they haven't had access to this kind of information?
Well, I think if you don't believe in it, then you're never going to be able to do it. I mean, you have to start with believing or being open, at least being neutral and being open to looking at things. And again, it's a subjective thing rather than an objective thing. So if you want to try something out, you need to try it out and see in your own experience what happens. That's really the only test for you. And then if it works for you, you cannot convince somebody else. They would have to have their own experience. That's really what it is.
How about DNA? You talk a lot about that. Is that something that can change over time? And you know how it seems to be a very important thing. I mean, really that it's like the ground base of everything.
Yeah, the DNA is basically the blueprint of how we are, and it looks like, I mean, what science is saying is that there is, of the 64 codons, there's 20 of them that are active, but the other ones are not, and they call it junk DNA. But in reality, I think it's dormant. It's just there that can be used and reactivated, and maybe there's different ways of doing it. And that's what the research is saying, is that when we are in fear, then you have a different activity of the DNA versus when you're in love. So it compresses and contracts and expands. And yeah, that changes the outcome of different things in your world and how you see things, I think, as well.
So it's like possible to change your DNA through your life?
Well, I don't know if you personally can sit and just focus on changing your DNA, but it seems like our DNA and our physiology is very able to adapt to new situations. In the beginning of the 1900s or whatever, we had much more oxygen in the atmosphere. Now we have less, and somehow we adapted to that. We have much more electrosmog and stuff now, and we're getting maybe sick from it. But at the same time, the body seems to try to adapt to the new situation. So there seems to be an adaptation that is possible within the DNA.
How is the DNA connected to emotions?
The DNA basically, again, it has these different codons on it, and when the energy or the frequency, in this case of emotion, that wave goes through it, then if it's a slow vibration, it hits the DNA in less positions, versus if you have a love frequency, which means that if you can have more of the codons activated, you can activate more of your perception of reality maybe, which means that then you can maybe see things a little bit different, or be able to see things different and expand your perceptions maybe.
If we have this wave of fear you talk about, or was it Braden who talked about that?
Braden, yeah.
That it's kind of a slow wave, you said, if we have this vibration of fear, or what?
Yeah, it's a slower vibration, and it seems like if we look around us, I mean, pretty much everything in this world is fear-based. There's very little positive news. It's war, it's famine, it's financial disaster, it's earthquakes, it's violence, it's...
but that's all we hear about in the media, and everywhere.
And that's also what we experience a lot maybe in our own little world too, with maybe losing our job, or fear of having not enough money, or getting sick. It's all a lot of fear on one level or another. And of course, if that fear then creates that wave, then it's hard to get out of changing that frequency in the DNA.
So that kind of puts down our vibration a lot.
Yeah, sure.
Why do you think that is basically what we are being fed?
Yeah.
Officially, why do you think that is happening?
Well, it could be happening if there is if somebody would know, or if somebody has an agenda, who knows? But if that's the case, then if you know that, then of course, if you put somebody in fear, then you know that's going to have that frequency. Then you know, okay, you cannot activate these other codons by using that other frequency.
So you think it could be manipulated on purpose?
Anything is possible.
And be implanted through the media and politically and financially and all of these things?
I mean, it's obvious that everything is fear-based out there, and anybody can see that. But we have the possibility to change that by just changing our frequency into a love frequency. And it's very easy to do that test yourself. You just take a couple of two similar plants, and then you give a lot of love to the one plant, and then you ignore the other one, and water them equally, and you see what happens in your own room, in your own life. And then you see the effect with love versus not love.
How can you see that on a plant?
Because the plant is life also, it's also frequency, and it reacts to frequency, just like water. And in water you can see it from the experience of Dr. Emoto and Dr. Kurotko and others. And it's the same thing with the plant.
So how can we change that constant frequency of fear? Because it seems to be something that the human beings just have generally also between each other. It's not just something they're being fed from outside.
No, we have emotions.
It happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
Fear of losing and fear of not being liked or loved by somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that we deal with all the time, fear and love. But I think it's something that we also can train ourselves to do more of.
How should people become more aware of how important how important it is to change that frequency away from fear? Because it seems to be such an integrated part of.
But we also know more or less that we don't feel that good when we are in fear. If you experience the other part of it, when you're in love with somebody, or in that situation, that feeling versus one when you're in fear of getting caught or fear of losing something, you just have to think back. Which one do you prefer? And then you say, well, that's what I want. Well, you know how that is, then you just try to multiply that more. It's like training golf, Okay, this is where I want to go. I want to be better at that.
It's probably easier said than done. How would you suggest or advise people to wake up to that and change that frequency?
Starting to be grateful for things in life and be grateful for positive things. And then be more conscious of what you're doing. Like when in the traffic somebody cuts in front of you in rush hour, instead of just being aggressive or being angry at it, just start to try to change your emotional response. And then once that becomes a habit. I think somebody said that shown that it takes about 5 weeks or 6 weeks to create a new habit. So once you're in
5 or 6 weeks to create a new habit.
Which means if you have a habit of drinking coffee or getting up in the morning or doing some specific thing, and that's a habit that you don't want anymore because it's not good for you, then instead of trying to just drop it, it could be a habit of smoking, it could be whatever, then instead of just dropping it, then change it into something that you want and transform it to a new habit. And if you can do that consistently, then after about 6 weeks or whatever it is, then that habit becomes more solid and much easier to deal with. And that's what they found out in neuroscience too, that the neurons fire in a specific way. And once they are set in that firing mechanism, then there's like a habit, it's solid. But then if you ignore it and start creating a new one, then you create a new habit.
What if people are very addicted to cigarettes or drinking alcohol or drugs or something like that? Will it also take just 5 or 6 weeks to change that habit?
I don't know. I mean, I can't say for anybody and everybody, but I know of people that have switched with no problem. And then there's people that has a really hard problem to do it.
Is that also about how their perception is?
I think some of it has to do with the perception, some of it has to do with a lot of other things. And I'm not saying it's going to be super simple to just do it, but for most habits it seems to be something that if you do it about that time, then it's easier for you to maintain that habit. Mm-hmm. So if you create a habit of just changing your attitude or your energy when somebody cuts off in traffic, then after that period of time, it's going to be maybe super much easier. Or maybe it's just automatic, you automatically do it. Like when you go to work, you don't think about how you're going to drive to work because you already have it pre-programmed, you know it, it's a habit, you just go and go. Mm-hmm. Actually, the opposite is true. If they start making the one road opposite where you're going, you won't even be aware. You all of a sudden you have the cars going ahead in front of you. That's how much our habits are ingrained, I think.
So the message is really to be positive, like what a lot of spiritual speakers are talking about, always being on a positive frequency, thinking positively.
I don't know, just positive. It's not just positive, but just be aware and be conscious, trying to be more conscious of where you put your attention and your awareness, mm-hmm. and then try to change your perception of how things are into a more positive way, if you want to call it positive. But yeah, whatever it is you want in life.
Mm-hmm. You talk a bit about remote viewing also. What exactly is that?
Well, remote viewing is it's a concept of looking into some events. Usually it's dealing with the future, and it could be also looking at an event at the current moment, but in a different place. And I can't remember exactly who developed. I think a guy called Ingo Swann was part of it, and it's been used supposedly by the CIA and military, etc. But it's also been used for other people that can go and do training with this.
So what exactly happens? What are you capable of doing? We can sit here and see something that is happening elsewhere?
It's not simple as that. It's specific protocols. Ed Dames is one of them that has a school for that. I'm not sure if he has it right now, but I think so. It's a protocol where basically you train yourself to, in other words, the normal thing is that you have like a manila envelope, and then a target is put in there. It could be a photograph, it could be a drawing, it could be whatever. Usually it's a photograph or something is in there. And then they put a number on the envelope and then put it away. And then the person that's trained to become a remote viewer gets the number, and that's all the person gets. And out of that, he needs to try to find out what is the target, what is the picture, what is it that you see. And if it's something that is...
So it's psychic abilities, really?
You can call it psychic abilities, clairvoyance, or whatever you want to call it. But it's a matter of seeing things or either in the future or in the same time at a different location, basically.
But how can you be trained in that if even you say the CIA is supposedly using it and the military?
Well, I don't know this for sure, but this is my understanding. And if anybody can be trained in... it's a protocol, like playing golf. It's just that you have to go through different things to learn it. And I think anyone can do it better or worse, just like becoming a golf player. So we all have different things we can be good at, but it's trainable.
What is DMT, the spirit molecule?
I don't remember exactly the name now, dimethyl tryptophan. DMT is something that's produced in our brain. It's all the way in nature and in trees and whatever. And when we go to sleep, then when it gets dark, the body creates melatonin that brings us deeper in the sleep state. And then later on, the DMT kicks in that puts on in what's called lucid dreaming. Now, if you get more of the DMT, it seems that takes us into another reality, another dimension, if you will. And this is what the shamans...
Happens when we sleep?
Well, it just goes to a point which they call the lucid dreaming, and lucid dreaming is a very active state of dreaming. But if you take more of it, this is what the brain is producing, but if you take more of it, and that happens like with the shamans and so on in their cultures, which takes, let's say, ayahuasca or popo or some of these hallucinogen drugs, it's part of nature. And then when you get more of it, then it seems to be that you are taking into a different dimensional state or a different frequency of vibration or different state of consciousness, whatever we want to call it. And it seems that that can be helpful for people that have problems too. There's a clinic in Ecuador or in Brazil, somewhere down there, where you actually can go if you have problems with drugs or you have whatever kind of problem. And that has turned out to be very helpful for people to process those problems and get rid of them. Mm-hmm. So there's different applications, but I think those things should be done under supervision also.
Yeah. Well, if everything is vibration, how does if everything is a vibration, it's a frequency, how are we, the body and the DNA or whatever, affected by all of the radioactive waves, Wi-Fi, mobile phones, radiation in general?
Yeah, obviously it seems that everything is affecting everything else if it's a vibration. And some things are, we could say, harmful and some are non-harmful, if you look in nature too. So in our physiology, our biological bodies, it seems that those vibrations are not natural. And since they're not natural, then they could have some harmful effects. Mm. At least until the body or the DNA is able to adapt to it, to the new situation. So at the current moment, yes, those things affect us. A lot of things affect us. Bad food, bad radiation, even too much sun, gamma rays, whatever. Yeah, that does affect us in our biological bodies.
Mm-hmm. And causes cancer.
Can cause
and
cancer.
Do we actually have a cure for cancer, or is it simply impossible since it's one of the worst diseases in the world?
Well, I think when it comes to sicknesses, I mean, they're, in my opinion, multidimensional. So it's not just one quick answer. Some people can get cancer because of emotional problems. Some can get it because of taking too much drugs or cigarettes. Some people can get it because of bad food or stress. I mean, it's so multidimensional. So, it's not just one quick answer. On a biological level, you can say, well, you do this. If you infuse it with a lot of oxygen, then the cancer cannot live in that environment. Yeah, fine. But that's a temporary little thing, like a Band-Aid. But if you have to get to the cause of it, the real cause of what's causing cancer or any sickness, before you can do something with it. I mean, a lot of people get healed or fixed for a while, but if you don't work on the cause of it, it's different. I mean, if you break your leg, you can fix it up in the hospital, and then it's fine. It's not a problem. But some of these other things could have much deeper issues, which is really hard to just put one label on.
Do you think that healing is something that can be used, spiritual healing?
Everything is a vibration. So yeah, I mean, everything is a vibration. That's the new things out there now. It's frequency medicine. And that's doing things to heal on that vibrational level.
And what are your thoughts on the pharmaceutical industry with the vaccines and the medicine that the doctors give us?
Yeah, again, I'm not into any of those things. So all I can say is that if everything is a vibration, then if something is not in harmony with your bodily field, it will create a distortion. George Lakhovsky came up with the multiple wave oscillator. And that's basically a thing that goes through the different vibrations of each organ and every vibration in the body and find out the harmonics of that. And then if you have an issue, then you're put between these two flat antennas that creates an oscillating field that goes up and down through all of those fields and basically teaches the body to get back to harmony. And once it gets back to harmony, then you have disease is something that's out of ease, and then you get back to ease, which is harmony or balance. And that's what always the body's craving for.
And what can people do, or ordinary people, to actually have this balance generally? What's the best advice you can give people?
Again, I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do. I mean, you can look at your food, you can look in what you do to exercise, you can look at what you think and your intentions and what you want to do in life and how you are in life with your emotions and feelings, etc. So, I mean, all of those things is important. I think all of those things needs to be looked at.
But it's a lot about thought and how you think.
I think it's much more about your heart space than thought, because thought is, again, it's the left brain there trying to analyze things and trying to figure everything out. I think it's more of getting your intention and being in a heart-based state where you try to change your emotional body more into being harmony.
And that comes from the heart.
Yeah, I mean,
heart energies.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it, but it's something where you're in tune with more of nature or whatever you want to call it. Something that harmonizes with you, where it makes you feel good, and you know when you're feeling good. Everybody knows that they have experienced sometime in life that they feel good. And then try, okay, if this makes me feel good, let's try to do more of that rather than more of the other.
What's your most important message? Why are you talking about these things? What is it that you want to see happening or achieve by telling people all of these wild things, really?
It's basically just, what I believe is that we have a boxed reality, all of us. And that boxed reality is dependent on our cultural programming from our parents, from society, from school, from TV, from media, from our own experiences, whatever that might be. And then if we buy into that box, then we actually create and make that box. So we want to get out of that box. We need to start looking at things in a different way to allow an expansion into something new and something that maybe is better for you. And so what I'm trying to do with that is just open up people's imagination to maybe there's something else out there. And when it comes to energy, well, there's maybe some other ways of doing that. When it comes to your own reality, maybe you can change something in this dam by making a hole in it, and then a new reality can happen that you can play with and see if this benefits you. And then the only way to do that is to try it. And then you can have an experience. And if that experience is beneficial to you, you say, wow, this is great, I have a better life now, then that can happen. Or maybe it doesn't happen, but you need to try, you need to figure out to try it. And that's basically what I want to accomplish, get people to think about their own reality and maybe what they can do about it and change it.
You've made us think outside the box today. So
Yeah,
that's been
hopefully.
very, very fascinating, very interesting. And I want to thank you very much for doing this interview with Age of Truth TV. So thank you so much, Ulf Dahlström. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.